Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Hey, this is Lauren Richmond Jr. Today I am welcoming David Emery to the show. David is the lead pastor of Harvard Avenue Christian Church since March of 2020. He is a passionate preacher, compassionate pastor, adept leader whose understanding of the gospel and vision for the church helped the congregation fulfill its mission to live and love like Jesus. David has a reputation for growing churches, reaching new people, and transforming lives in every church he has served throughout his ministry, which includes congregations in Arkansas, Texas, and Kentucky. He holds a BA from TCU and an MDiv from Vanderbilt. If you were to ask David what his favorite scripture passage is, he would say anything he's preaching on this week. An avid runner and multiple marathoner, when David isn't on the trail or in the pulpit, he enjoys spending time with his wife Teresa and their children and grandchildren. All right, this is Lauren Richmond. I'm host of the Future Christian Podcast. I'm here today with David Emery. David, welcome to the show. Anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Hey, just glad to have the opportunity to visit with you today, Lauren, and excited about the conversation coming up. And we've lived in Tulsa now going on 3 years. I moved here in March of 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. And, I didn't know what I was saying yes to.
Yeah.
What I thought I was saying yes to is different than what I said yes to.
Yeah.
And so it been an interesting few months to begin. Yeah.
Yeah. Share a little bit, if you would, kind of about your faith story, what that looked like for you coming to the faith and what that looks like today.
Yeah, I grew up in a very small Christian church, Disciples of Christ, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm from Fort Worth. And a small church of 70, 80 people in attendance, multi-generational and very intergenerational. And it was a really positive experience. My family, we went every Sunday. And it was when I was in high school that I had a conversation with some friends about what it meant to welcome Christ into my life, to be born again, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I had a very powerful, meaningful moment of welcoming Christ into my heart that really put my life on the trajectory that I'm on now. And it was very personable and very real. I had been baptized when my family joined the church, but then out of this personal connection I had with Christ through this personal encounter and prayer, I was baptized again at my home church. My pastor didn't think it was necessary, but I felt it was very necessary because it was my own decision. And so it was at that point I began this journey. And when I was at church camp, I went to church camp in the Christian Church Disciples. At church camp, I heard a call to ministry, and that put me on the path that I'm on today. And I would say that, I came from pretty humble background. Parents were hardworking people. Mm-hmm. And a very simple faith, went to TCU, then off to Vanderbilt, and all that goes with having your mind open to different ways of thinking about your faith in your life. Yeah. But I think some of the same core things are still true of me. I've always, the unconditional love of God and radical hospitality have always been kind of the core of my faith from the very beginning.
Yeah. What's the spiritual
really
practice?
Describes who I am as a Christian today. And I would say, I had one other thing, Lauren, is that today I call it theological humility. Mm-hmm. But as growing up in the Christian Church Disciples, this appreciation for the diversity of thought and opinion has always been really important to me. We call it at Harvard, theological humility is one of our core values.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What's a spiritual practice that's been meaningful for you?
Well, I would say probably the best part of my day is in the morning. And prayer, reading scripture, and coffee early in the morning. I get up really early, between 4:30 and 5 most mornings.
Wow.
And so I have two things that I do. I read scripture.
Mm-hmm.
I write in a journal. I write in a journal almost every day. And then I exercise.
Yeah.
And so I'm I would describe myself as a very hyper person.
Yeah.
And so early morning, I'm very focused, and Bible reading in the morning is really important to me. And then I go out and usually run. I'm a runner. I'm a marathon runner,
Mm-hmm.
and I run between 4 and 5 days a week. When I was a
Wow.
little younger, I was running 6 days a week,
Yeah.
up to 60 miles a week.
Wow.
And the clarity
Yeah. Yeah.
of between the Bible reading and followed up with running has been a really important part of my life.
What's your best marathon time then?
What's that?
What's your best marathon time?
3:27. I qualified for Boston
Wow.
3 times.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I cut you off. What were you going to say?
The running, what I was going to say was that I had a pretty big transformation that took place in my life. About 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And I went through 6 months of radiation and chemotherapy. And that was a huge thing for me. I was in my, like 45, 46 range, 47.
Mm-hmm.
And I really began to change the whole way I was looking at my life and my ministry, because I really had no outside interest. And I really didn't have a rich life of spiritual practice. I was pastoring a growing church, a larger church than what I'm serving now, and was pretty unhealthy. I weighed 75 pounds more than I weigh now. I was not athletic in any way. And so after I went through the chemotherapy and the radiation, on the other side of it, began to work out and began to pay more attention to my life outside of my work. And that's when I began to run and dropped the weight and found out I was a pretty good runner and developed a whole community outside of the church world that's just made my life a whole lot healthier and happier. And I took a look at all the people who are effectively leading organizations and institutions in their 60s and 70s, and there are many, but all of them, most all the people I see as role models have been people who have been physically fit. And physically fit, pay attention to their weight, to their health, exercise. It's not always a guarantee of good leadership,
right?
But I think paying attention to our physical health is just as important as it is what we do. Reading scripture, prayer is an important discipline. Paying attention to our bodies.
Yeah, that's a good word there.
I would say, Lauren, if I was going to give advice to somebody who was young in ministry, is that exercise. The time that you spend exercising physically, find something that you love to do and take care of yourself physically, and that will lengthen your life and strengthen your heart and your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good there. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So, let me just kind of introduce how our paths kind of crossed, maybe.
Sure.
So I'm a big fan of Tony Morgan and the Unstuck Group. I don't know how I came across his podcast, but I've been a pretty regular listener of this podcast for at least probably 2, 3, 4, maybe longer years. And, Tony Morgan definitely comes, I think, David, this is fair, from more of an evangelical tradition, but he does work with, and the Unstuck Group works with a lot of mainline churches. So one day I was listening to it and I heard this guy, David Emery, on the show, and I'm like, talking about how he comes from a mainline church. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what mainline tradition does he come from? And then I looked him up and he's Christian Church Disciples of Christ, same what I am. And I was sort of flabbergasted because I think, David, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I think this is a bit broad brush, but I think many mainliners would take offense, perhaps, at some of the attitudes and methods that the Unstuck Group and Tony Morgan might prescribe. I'm obviously more open to their ideas. I, in fact, had one of the reps, Sean Bublitz, on the show several episodes back. So go back probably about 10, 15, maybe 20 episodes. But anyway, so I said, man, I got to talk more to this David guy. And in that episode, you kind of talked about your work at Harvard Avenue Christian Church. So why don't you kind of just introduce how you got there and what that work kind of looked like?
Yeah. So I spent 17 years in my last congregation in Louisville, a church larger than the church that I'm serving now. And at the end of that period, I just felt like a season was coming to an end for me. And I felt like the church would benefit from having a new pastor and a new leader. And either I was going to have to be the new leader or the new pastor, or they were going to need a new leader and a new pastor. And I got a call from Harvard. I wasn't speaking to anyone else. I got a call from Harvard and made a decision pretty quickly that this was going to be a good place for us. I've always felt like I've been pretty good at making assessment of places that want to do something, that are not so stuck in the past, that they are more committed to tradition than reaching and connecting with people. And my love is helping a church cast vision. And get clarity about values and purpose and direction, and establishing a strategy to accomplish those things. And so that's when I came here. Harvard had a pretty good run of 10 years with a strong leader, strong, beloved pastor. He was came at 30, left at 40, and had a really good, outstanding ministry with us. And so I came after he'd been gone about a year, and was expecting that, we were going to sort of pick up there and move forward. But then we had the pandemic, and it changed the trajectory of everything we were doing. But what they asked me to do, Lauren, was they wanted me to lead the church to the next chapter. And they just had this closed one chapter of expansion, and the church had added a lot of younger families, and the church had some good health. And so they wanted me to bring my leadership and vision for the future. And I'll be honest, I was unsure initially when I arrived, when I met with the search committee, whether or not I was going to do this, because people always say they want to do that, but then they don't really want to when they find out that you're going to have to make changes that are uncomfortable for people. And so I wasn't quite sure that they really wanted to be led to a new place and to a new direction. But here's the thing. The pandemic produced an incredible opportunity for the church to make some changes and to make some shifts. A good transition from past leadership to new leadership made the opportunity to not just go back to what we were doing before. And he gave us this wonderful window. But I will tell you, probably for the first 3 or 4 months, I was trying to figure out, man, what's happening here? Did I make a mistake? And then once I got my mind around, hey, good, again, tragic, all the things that happened in the pandemic, loss, death, suffering, all that stuff, tragic. But once I flipped my mind and thinking about, okay, how are we going to leverage this for what's next for Harvard? And so that's what happened. And all we did for the first year during that pandemic was just about building trust and relationships, and about preaching and teaching and using the best way we could communicate at that time to build a platform for this work to be done. And when we came out of the pandemic, as we began to come out of it, we put together a vision team of 4 or 5 really key leaders to take a look at where are we right now as a church? Where do we want to go? What do we consider our strengths and assets? What are our weaknesses? And then that's when we made the decision to work with an outside consulting group, because I felt like that where we were going to need help was, I don't have any trouble as a pastor coming up with ideas or vision and direction and things like that, and helping a church craft that. My struggle has always been with strategy and implementation and narrowing it down, and then the staffing piece. And the staffing piece of working with Unstuck was probably the most valuable thing that we did with them, because they help us. So this is where we're going as a church. Right. Now, how are we going to staff for it? And honestly, Lauren, a lot of churches don't have the courage to take these steps, because it takes some tough decisions. It means leaving behind things that people love for something new. It means making changes within your staff, and not everyone wants to do that. And so sometimes we love what's comfortable more than we love what's in our future.
To that point, what has been, or what was kind of the biggest obstacle? And you can come at this 2 ways. What are some of the biggest obstacles maybe in your work there, and more broadly speaking, what you've seen in revitalization type work?
Well, I think one of the biggest obstacles here and everywhere is structure. We have these. I think in this disciples of Christ Christian Church, we have this very open theology that is
Right.
open to a lot of different traditions and and so, sitting on a Sunday morning, you have people all around you come from a variety of political places and lifestyle places and theological places. And there's this openness that is beautiful and wonderful and rich and meaningful. Yet we put it in a structural coffin that doesn't allow it to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so by that, I mean that we're more committed to our way of doing church than what we have to offer the world. We're more invested in our structures, our worship structures, our leadership structures, our bylaws than we are who we can be. And it just sucks all the energy out of the life of the church when all your energy is focused on keeping a structure that no longer gives life to the organization alive. And so a church has got to be willing to ask God, where are you leading us? Where are you taking us? What are you saying to us? Who it is that we're being called to reach? And then the structure has to submit to the Spirit, to the movement of the work of the Spirit. And I think that is a huge obstacle. Here's the other thing. And I'm going to say this about Mainline. The Mainline church, and sometimes us as disciples, my concern is that we've also lost our love and appreciation for theological diversity.
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid that we're doing the same thing that we're seeing happening in other parts of the life of the church that are swinging real hard to the right. The church swings real hard ideologically to the left.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a lot of passion for connecting with people in the church who just have a different theological orientation.
Yeah.
So if you have a traditional understanding of marriage, it's pretty hard to fit sometimes in a church that has decided to move in a specific way as their primary focus. And let me say this: we are a church that does practice radical hospitality and is open to gay and lesbian people. But I think one of the reasons that the mainline churches is dying and shrinking is because of a lack of theological humility. And what I mean by that is an unwillingness to listen to different voices.
Yeah.
So we worked with the Unstuck group, Lauren, and you just got to learn to translate what they're saying.
Right. Right.
They have the same love and passion for reaching people that most of us do and care about a lot of the same things that we do, but we get hung up in language. And sometimes we're theologically snobbish, that we're not willing to listen to someone to understand where they're coming from and what they care about, and we can learn something from other people. And I think that one of the things that's been important to me in my ministry is I realized pretty early on that if I was going to get some meaningful leadership training, it was meant to be outside of our denomination, because and I'm not saying that we couldn't get it within it, but I was going to look at some different ways of doing church. I don't know if I answered your question. It was kind of a long string.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think let's go into that a little bit, because I think whether it's in, I've worked in several different Christian traditions. Currently, I'm working in the United Methodist tradition, ordained disciples of Christ. But obviously in traditions, in denominations, there can be this unwillingness to look beyond the tradition, the skepticism of folks outside the tradition. I'm reminded of Simon Sinek. His book, Infinite Games, he talks about not seeing folks as competitors or enemies, but as worthy rivals, I think is the word he uses. And I appreciate your point about of theological humility. I was thinking about when you use the term about structure has to submit to the Spirit, I was thinking about I listen to Mark Clifton and Tom Rainier all the time. And obviously I have to filter some things, like when they use purely he language for the pastor, to filter some things. But it's interesting. Mark Clifton will say that if the bylaws is the ultimate authority in your church, you have a problem. And I don't know if certainly in disciples context, having worked in and have friends in the UCC United Church of Christ context, which is ultimately also very congregational polity, I don't know if they'd be willing to say hey, structure has to take a backseat to the Spirit. And I understand, like, that can be dangerous at times. Like, we want to guard against abuse, right? But yeah.
Let me clarify something.
Yeah.
When I say structure must submit to the Spirit, I don't mean there shouldn't be structure.
Right.
There has to be structure. There has to be bylaws, because it can't just be following the passions and the whims of a leader.
Right.
But what I mean is we set up structures that no longer work anymore for us.
Yeah.
And we are slaves to them, as opposed to a structure that's aligned. You got to have alignment between staff, structure, vision, and direction for the church to move forward. So it's not just a freedom to do whatever with no structure. It's a structure where you have organizational alignment between. So here's the big mistake that we make.
Yeah.
The reason people are really suspicious of vision talk, and people are vision weary of this sort of talk. And the reason for that is everybody has been in a room with people, and they spent all this energy crafting core values, vision statements, and directions, and then nothing happens and nothing changes.
Right.
Why is that?
Right.
It doesn't happen because the structure has not changed to make it happen. Resources have not been realigned.
Yeah.
So we're still serving the thing that we were doing before. We just added something onto it, and it can't get accomplished. So you got to simplify what you're doing and move it in that direction, and that's where resistance comes. So that's where let's just use the example of outreach ministries. Okay. So let's say your church has been supporting this particular outreach ministry for 25 years, and the congregation has lost passion for it, and there's no energy for it, but you got the one person in the church that just is really committed to it, and it's their baby and their thing. And so at some point you got to say, hey, you know what? We appreciate you've done this for 25 years, but this is not where we're going anymore, and we're not going to commit financial resources. Those things are really hard. But what ends up happening is you can't move forward quickly because you got a church that worships 125 people, and you got 50 decision makers.
Yeah. And
it just doesn't work. Smaller boards, smaller leaders. When you have 25, when it's a complete democracy on everything, nothing ever gets accomplished. And there has to be the willingness to allow a core of leaders to be able to set direction for the church. And that requires just this high level of trust and confidence. And it takes a long time to earn it. Yeah, that's what I mean by structure and spirit.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit, because someone like Tony Morgan and the Unstuck group, they advocate for smaller boards, smaller decision-making groups. Obviously, in congregational polity, it can be interpreted very differently, but there's some folks, whether it's in congregational type governance churches like the Disciples of Christ, who want to be like bigger boards, more people, more, consensus type. Why do you think that's just not a good idea?
It doesn't work.
Cut and dry.
Show me a disciples congregation that's effectively growing and discipling people where they have a structure like that.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the record of our denomination.
Yeah.
It's in a significant decline.
Right.
And look in the congregations. You interviewed Jeff Mitchell recently, growing congregation. And I can point out, several disciples congregations in the country that are growing, and all of them, I guarantee, have addressed this issue. But when you have this, large boards, it's just ineffective, inefficient. It doesn't work in the business world, and it's not going to work in the church. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions to everything.
Right.
But there's a way of arriving at consensus with smaller boards and smaller leadership groups. It's just a different way of going about it. I would say at Harvard, we have a small decision-making body, but we have a great deal of consensus about direction, and that comes through trust. It comes. The congregational leaders are elected. We don't just make decisions. I am a collaborative leader, and when we're making big decisions, we talk with key influencers and leaders. There's a way about going about doing that.
Right. What's your thoughts then for a pastor who sees this problem in their church and is like, we have, 12, 15. I mean, I don't remember, Tony Morgan in his podcast jokes about seeing boards of 30, I think, of people. I mean, that doesn't shock me, frankly, having worked in the Mainline, to imagine that there could be a board of 30 or more people. But inevitably, I think one of the biggest retorts is going to be, oh, well, we've got to guard against abuse, or we've got against too few decision makers. What would you say to the pastor or congregation trying to move in that direction?
Well, certainly that's true. And there are boards. I think a board under 12, perfect board's probably somewhere between 6 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor not being a member of the board.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you got to have checks and balances put in place. We have, and I don't know that there's any less accountability with 9 people there are with 30 people.
Yeah.
There's probably more accountability with 9 than there are with 30. Besides, the reality is you have 30 people on the board and 9 people show up anyway.
Right.
You have 9 decision makers. But here's I think this is the critical thing. Let's say a pastor wants to make this change in the church. And if somebody wants to operate, I'm not going to fault anybody if that works for people. What ends up happening is the problem with larger boards, the church becomes very insider focused.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the energy is focused on the maintaining of the organization as opposed to missional work in the community. So if the church pastor wants to make this move, you don't start with structure. So the big mistake would be, I hear all the time, hey, we're thinking about changing our bylaws. Well, why? We're thinking about getting a smaller board. Why? You got to ask the question, why first? What's the vision? Where's the church going? What's the direction?
That's good.
And then when people get really excited about the vision and the direction of the church and what we're doing, then they're willing to change because they can see why we're doing it. For just change's sake is meaningless. It just burns energy. People's lives are too busy.
Right.
And I'm talking about healthy churches where there's some churches you just need to realize it's not going to happen because people are more interested in being in control than they are the mission.
Right.
And you just need to pick up and move on if you can't break the hold on that. If you want to do so, if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But if a pastor really wants to lead an organizational change, it has to begin with the heart. Where is God taking us? Where is God leading us? What are we being called to do? What's our primary focus? What's our emphasis? Where's God leading us? And get people excited about that. Have a vision, have a sense of direction, and then everything else follows it. Because then it makes sense. Because otherwise, you're just organizing something else that has no reason, purpose. It all begins with why. That's a Simon Sinek thing too.
Yep.
What's your big why? What's your purpose?
Right. I'm thinking of a United Methodist pastor I follow who will talk about the importance of vision. And again, David, I don't know your thoughts on this, but I feel like in the Disciples of Christ tradition, there's this kind of reticence about pastors being vision casters. And this Methodist pastor I follow, Jack Chitama, he emphasizes that a leader casting vision doesn't define this is how it's got to be. It creates space and energy and passion for other people to vision themselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. The challenge and there's 2 or 3. I'm not a person who believes that the pastor's like the guy that comes off the mountain with the tablets and says, this is what we're doing.
Right.
That's another model. And that is not a model that I value for myself as a leader. Mine is more about listening, paying attention to the opportunity. And I am a vision person. I have 1,000 ideas every day.
Yeah.
But we do that in collaboration with other people. Here's what happens. If it's the vision that I bring, it's a lot harder to make it go and work and real if it's my vision.
Yeah.
But if it's something that we've crafted together, it becomes because other people own it. So here at Harvard, the reason why our vision is getting traction is our staff owns it, our leaders own it, our elders own it, our people own it. And then what happens is the church begins to get some momentum and energy. It just begins to take off,
right?
And you don't have to work so hard at it. But there I don't know how a church can move forward without vision.
Yeah.
Without a picture of what can be.
Let me ask.
I don't know how you move forward if you're content with having a group of 40 or 50 people
Yeah.
who are loving and caring for one another and doing good things in the community. That's a beautiful, perfect model.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want it, but the reality is the world we're living in right now, this world of anxiousness and fear and us versus them, good versus bad, all that sort of stuff. The gospel is something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And don't we want to invite people into that world that shapes lives in faith? Take Jesus out, take discipleship out, just call us the United Way and put a thermometer out in front of the building. There's nothing. Why would you want to be a part of the church?
Yeah.
Just go belong to a small group somewhere doing stuff. But what I mean to say is the church needs people, need the gospel, the good news of Jesus in the world needs us in the world right now because it is something different.
Yeah.
Jesus was something different. He wasn't a Pharisee. He wasn't a Sadducee. He wasn't an Essene. He wasn't a Zealot. He wasn't a Roman. He offered a different path. And I think that's the opportunity. We want to draw people into that.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be content with decline.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. Let me ask you two more questions.
Yeah.
One is kind of broad. One is kind of to your context there. I got to shout out, like, David and Harvard Avenue have some great branding. Your website looks fabulous. First, let me just give a shout out to the website because I'm obsessed with good church websites. David, Harvard Avenue has a video homepage. And the thing that I love about that, David, is that you immediately see within 5 to 10 seconds, that video answers questions that people want to know about the church within 5 to 10 seconds. So it describes what the demographics look like, what people wear to church. I had J.J. Peterson on several episodes ago, and he said that the number one question people want to know from a website is what to wear to your church. It answers what style of worship you have, small groups, whether kids exist. So a great website. So talk about some of the intentional work you've done on that kind of rebranding. Again, that marketing, branding thing can be a scary word for mainliners.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And let me also acknowledge one thing. We are fortunate that we have resources that other people might not have to be able to work.
Sure.
And so it's not a level playing field. And I've served other congregations that did not have the same level of resources.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily a level playing field in terms of that. But so I felt like that we needed it all started basically with a website.
Yeah.
And I said, we need a website because our website's just really out of date. And we're going through the pandemic, and how do people access what we're doing? And then, but you can't build a website if you don't know who you are or what you're about.
Right.
So we initially contracted with a group to build the website for us, but then we backed up and said, no, we're not there yet.
Yeah,
let's not
good.
Get ahead of ourselves. Let's get clear about our vision. Then we worked with the Unstuck group first. We worked with the Unstuck group, and then we moved on to a second. We worked with a group called Art Speak Creative, who are wonderful people. And I would say they're much more conversant with the Mainline than perhaps the Unstuck group is. They have a lot of people who served in more evangelical congregations who sort of who live in both of those worlds, and really they really understood who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole branding thing, it's not about marketing. It's about letting people know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's about knowing who your community is. And so there is the way that we talk about who we are when we're with one another.
Yeah.
But how do we talk to people in our community?
Right.
So it's like this. It's like I don't need to just tell people what they need. I need to know, what are people looking for? What are their felt needs? What are their concerns?
Yeah.
What do they care about? What's going on with their kids? And so part of this branding thing that we did was to understand our community better and to put our best foot forward in the community. And why would anybody be suspicious of excellence as opposed to mediocrity? Because frankly, a lot of it is just so mediocre and bad. It's unappealing. And you've got, I mean, it's terrible. It's
painful. It's painful to look at.
Look, the best thing that a church could do, if they want to reach younger people in the community, is put something that looks fresh and doesn't look old and dated.
Yeah.
And you know, for instance, I get on church websites and they still got people wearing masks.
Right.
On the front page, and they're still got to talk about COVID protocol. But most churches, they just haven't updated their website.
Right.
They've still got the Easter production on there from 2019.
Right.
And so if you got younger people, they're going to want to, and who doesn't want to look good? So now for us, before anybody steps in our building, they've been online with us first.
Mm-hmm.
Lady walked in our building today and said, I'd like to speak to a pastor. Usually that means their car's broke on the freeway and they need gas.
Right.
But this lady walked in and said, I want to talk to Pastor Dave or Pastor Kevin. I've been online for a few weeks with the church, and I'd just like to meet a real person before I come in person.
Wow. That's a great story.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's good. That's good. Let me ask this then before we take a break. You know, you've kind of alluded to it. The Mainline is going through a significant decline. I've not really been Mainline long enough, 10, 15 years to really, you know, have that big a broad a picture, besides just looking at the data. You know, what do you think? This may be too big of a question to ask, but maybe give it your best stab. Like, what do you think? What are some thoughts you want to see or think need to happen, to kind of help revitalize mainline denominations and churches?
You know, it's a really huge topic. And obviously I'm a mainline person because I'm a disciple in my whole life. And, I think really it comes down to the things we've been talking about: vision, purpose, and direction, and about your sphere of influence. Our commitment in the Mainline Church to social justice is significant and needed and necessary. But I think we also need to make a commitment to the hearts and lives of the people that are in our communities, in the sense that the families. Mm-hmm. So all through the pandemic, most mainline churches, to some extent, were talking about race, sexual orientation, justice-related things, but all important.
Right. Yep.
But meanwhile, we got families at home that are having marital struggles and difficulties and hardships, and families are trying to what they're going to do with their kids. And it's kind of like, I think that you got to reach people to reach our communities. That discipleship's not just about what we're doing, you know, at the shelter, or at the protest, or in a particular part of our community. It's about the people who are in our congregations. Ultimately, it's about discipleship. We call ourselves disciples, disciples of Christ. What does it mean to make disciples? And I think it does come down to spiritual formation.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? And here's the reality. Doesn't matter what church we're talking. By the way, it's not just the main lines that are shrinking. Every church is shrinking.
Right.
The Southern Baptist lost 500,000 people in the last 2 or 3 years. The reality is people just don't want what we're offering.
Yeah.
They're very interested in Jesus. They're just not interested in what we're offering. And so we've got to, and if we're bored by what we have, and if we're bored and it's not interesting to us, it's not going to be interesting in anyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't really answer your question. I wouldn't want to prescribe something to the main line because I just sort of feel out of sorts, really out of place completely.
It's fair enough.
You know, I don't know where I fit. I'm not mainline. I'm not old line. I'm not liberal. I'm not conservative.
Yeah.
I'm not left. I'm not right. I'm none of those things. I just want to live and love like Jesus and get other people to do it. I want to take all the boundaries down because mainliners and conservatives, they'll put these boundaries around.
Yeah.
I just want to take it all down and just point people toward Jesus, who shows us how to live and love in the world. And I think the world would be a lot better if we just lived in that way. So I'm convinced of that.
Yeah. Let me ask this, David, in response to what you said. One of the things that I felt and was part of really core part of my ethos in a previous ministry context was just this thought that, and I think, others might disagree with me, but this is my thought, is that before I'm going to get, those families, like you mentioned, to really see the racial injustice, the LGBT exclusion, all these serious social justice issues, is I felt like, and again, others might disagree with me, but I felt like that I needed to see them and see them struggling with their kids, see them struggling to pay their mortgage, see them struggling in their marriage. And I think something that breaks my heart is I just feel like, broadly speaking, mainline Protestantism has kind of given up on like white suburbia. And I don't know, like I feel strongly emotional even about that right now, because I just think like there's so many, and again, I don't want to say that like the focus of church should be white people or white suburbia. Like I believe church is for all people, in the gospel, but I don't know. That's just been something that's really been on my heart the last few years.
I could not agree with you. I couldn't agree with you any more than that. The gospel is truly for everybody. And, this is one of the criticisms that I have of us, of what I call just the lack of humility within our traditions, mainline traditions. Are you familiar with Live Church TV?
Yeah.
So they've got campuses.
Yeah, campus down the street from me in Colorado.
Campuses everywhere. They probably got 200,000 or 300,000 people on a weekend in attendance. And people will look at that and they'll sort of dismiss it because they don't.
Yep.
But you know what? I'll tell you something. I will tell you something. I guarantee you that those churches are making the 200,000 to 300,000. They care about the community. They care about poverty. They care about the things we're talking about. And they're making a huge impact in the communities with regard to poverty, hunger, all those kinds of things, cleaning up schools, doing cleanup days, doing service. They're all in on all that stuff. But because we don't agree with them theologically, we want to dismiss them. And what are they doing? They're reaching people.
Yeah.
We are followers of Jesus Christ. And I just think that we've got to hold on to the divinity of Jesus along with the humanity of Jesus. And it's just kind of like we've given up on the idea that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, called to bring salvation and love to the world. And that place in my heart, faith, and trust in him is life-changing and transforming.
Yeah.
That is something I've never lost. I don't really know how to describe myself because I'm not this or that.
Yeah.
I care about the issues that you're talking about, racial justice, the inclusion of the LGBTQ community. But I also believe that Jesus is the Son of the living God, the Christ that came to save me from my life and from myself. Don't believe that to the exclusion of others.
Yeah. But
without that, we're just a group of people gathering around a good teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that can be a good thing, but I'm not, we got families that are concerned about meaning and purpose.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. You can tell I'm a little bit passionate about that.
Yeah. Well, we should probably leave it there. For those, go back to my last, or for those passionate about this conversation, check out my episode with Jeff Mitchell. He made the phrase that Christology shapes ecclesiology. So go back and listen to that episode for our listeners. Here, let's take a quick break and come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with David Emery. David, appreciate the conversation. I always give these closing questions. You can take them as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what do you want to do with that day?
If I'm Pope for a day?
Yeah. What do you want to do with that day?
That's a great question.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
Come back to that. I don't.
A theologian or historical Christian figure you want to meet or bring back to life?
John Wesley.
John Wesley. Okay. Yeah, my Methodist listeners more like that.
I'm doing a sermon series coming up this next month. We're doing a small group series and sermon series called The Grace Effect, and we're looking at 5 people in history and the impact that grace had on their life. And Wesley is one of that we're looking at as a church and his story. And I'm telling his story And we're talking about grace and the role of transformation. So it'd be an interesting conversation for me.
That's good. I love that. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
The us versus them mentality and the inability to solve common problems, the lack of human decency and respect. Superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools is a member of our church and just resigned from her position yesterday.
Wow.
And she serves one of the largest school districts in the country.
Yeah.
And the political division and mean-spiritedness that has taken place around a lot of these things, to me, has been disheartening and heartbreaking. And it's just a microcosm of the whole world. And she's an amazing, amazing leader and amazing person.
Wow. Hopes for the future of Christianity.
That we will embrace humility and radical hospitality and move away from the structures that make it difficult for us to love people. It's relational. It's all relational. It's about loving people.
Yeah.
Embodying the teaching of Jesus to love and serve.
Where can people connect with you, David?
Through our website. www.hacctulsa.org. And my email is david@hacctulsa.org.
All right. Well, thanks so much, David, for your time and the conversation. Always leave folks with a word of peace. May God's peace be with you.
Peace with you also. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.